The crew of the Sirius Dawn had been drifting through the deep, dark emptiness of space for months. They were on a routine exploration mission, charting new star systems and gathering data for humanity's ever-expanding knowledge of the cosmos. However, nothing could have prepared them for the discovery that would shake them to their core. It started as a simple anomaly on their sensors, a massive, seemingly abandoned ship floating in the void. It was unlike anything they had seen before. Its design was strange, with angles and shapes that didn't resemble any known civilization's craft. It didn't even look like it was built by any species in the galaxy. Its markings were faded and damaged, but the unmistakable signs of age were there, as if the ship had been drifting for eons. What stood out even more was the fact that scans identified it as originating from a Class 15 death world, a planet so dangerous and lethal that no known species had survived its horrors long enough to establish any form of society. The very concept of a sentient species surviving there was a mystery in itself, and yet, this ship had come from there. The Sirius Dawn crew felt the hairs on the back of their necks stand up as they approached the derelict vessel. With every passing minute, the sense of unease grew. It wasn't just the size of the ship that caused concern. It was the fact that this ship seemed wrong. Even in the dead of space, its silent presence was oppressive. The closer they got, the more they realized how little they understood about it. Their first instinct was to proceed with caution, but curiosity got the better of them. They initiated a scan of the ship, searching for signs of life or any detectable systems still functional. The result was troubling. It was clear that the ship's AI systems were still active, but they were glitching, flickering on and off, sending out erratic signals in bursts. The crew decided to board. After all, a derelict ship from such a hostile place was a discovery that could change everything. They donned their suits and entered the ship, their footsteps echoing in the vast empty hallways. Inside, they found themselves in a ship that felt wrong, not just abandoned, but abandoned with purpose. There was an eerie stillness, but the ship was filled with strange technology, machines, gadgets, and devices that defied explanation. None of them had ever seen anything like it. Some of the machinery appeared to be beyond even the Sirius Dawn's crew's knowledge of technology. Still, it wasn't just the strange devices that were unsettling. It was the sealed doors, hidden chambers and blocked-off sections. Every time they tried to access one of these rooms, the ship's AI would go haywire, sending out jumbled, cryptic messages. "Do not open. They are still here. One last hope. Humanity will rise." The messages made little sense but hinted at something far deeper. The more they explored, the more it became clear that this was not a simple abandoned vessel. It had been occupied by beings, human beings it seemed, though they were clearly not the same humans they knew. The technology aboard was designed to withstand extremes beyond anything the crew had imagined. But even more startling was the realization that humans had somehow managed to survive on the Class 15 death world, a place no one had ever returned from. The ship's data logs, though corrupted, revealed startling information. Something had happened to the human inhabitants of this ship. It wasn't just survival they had achieved. They had adapted, altered themselves in ways that were unthinkable. The Sirius Dawn's crew was left with one burning question. How could humanity have thrived on such a deadly planet? And if these humans had made it home, why had they left the ship behind, alone in the void? As they moved deeper into the heart of the derelict ship, the tension mounted. Every shadow, every malfunction of the AI, every unexplained glitch made the crew more aware of the risks of their exploration. The abandoned ship was a dead zone, but it didn't feel like an ordinary ghost ship. It felt like a warning, one that they couldn't ignore. And the deeper they went, the more questions began to pile up, each one darker than the last. The Sirius Dawn crew stepped cautiously into the darkened corridors of the derelict ship. The air inside felt cold and still, carrying an unsettling silence that seemed to press against their ears. The walls, once gleaming with advanced technology, were now covered in grime, streaked with age, as if the ship had been forgotten for centuries. As they moved through the ship's maze-like hallways, they began to find signs that someone had once lived here. Personal belongings were scattered across the floor: tattered journals, old uniforms, a cracked photograph of a group of people, their faces faded but still human. It was strange. This ship, once a symbol of escape, had been home to someone. But who and why had they left it behind? The crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were trespassing in a place that had long been abandoned by its creators. Yet, there was something deeply wrong about the emptiness they encountered. Their exploration continued deeper into the ship. In the crew quarters, they found more than just personal items. There were strange, unsettling signs, dried-up plants that should have never been able to grow in such an environment. Unmarked containers filled with liquids that emitted faint but peculiar glows. It was clear that life, or something akin to it, had flourished here, despite the ship's design being far removed from anything that would support such life. The more they uncovered, the more questions piled up. Had humanity somehow found a way to survive on the Class 15 death world, a place so lethal that even the toughest species would perish in mere days? The crew struggled to comprehend it. How could a race, whose survival instincts had once been limited to basic survival, have thrived in such a savage world? Then, they found the logs. Old, corrupted, but still readable enough to get a glimpse into the horrifying truth. The data showed that the human crew had not simply lived on the planet. They had been forced to adapt in ways that no one could have predicted. Desperate and running out of time, they had turned to genetic modification, altering themselves, changing their very biology to withstand the planet's brutal conditions. Radiation, extreme temperatures, monstrous predators. Nothing was safe. But the humans had persevered. Their bodies had changed. Their minds had altered. They had become something entirely different from the humans who first set foot on the planet. They were no longer just survivors. They were a new breed of humanity, born of necessity and pushed to the edge of human limits. Yet, something had gone terribly wrong. The escape ship, designed to take them away from the planet, was meant to carry them to safety. But instead, it had become a tomb, a grave for those who had hoped to leave but couldn't. The logs spoke of a mutiny, of a crew spiraling out of control as their altered bodies began to break down in unexpected ways. As their genetic modifications continued to evolve, they lost their humanity. The modifications that had been designed to protect them turned against them, twisting them into something grotesque. Some of the crew had died, others had gone mad, and the rest had locked themselves away in secret chambers, hoping to escape. The horrific transformation. The more the crew of the Sirius Dawn read, the more they realized they weren't alone on this ship. Suddenly, the silence that had hung in the air for so long was shattered by a low, guttural growl. The crew froze. A figure emerged from the shadows, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was human, yet grotesque, its skin mottled, its eyes too wide and unblinking. It was a creature born of the desperate experiments of the survivors, a twisted shadow of humanity. The mutated figure hissed, and more followed, emerging from the darkness of the ship's hidden chambers. They were not just survivors anymore. They were something far more dangerous. They had become an entirely new breed of humanity, adapted to survive the impossible, but at the cost of their minds and bodies. The Sirius Dawn crew backed away slowly, hearts racing. These altered humans were more than just a curiosity. They were a terrifying reminder of the lengths humanity had gone to survive. They weren't just hostile. They were predators. And now, the crew realized they weren't merely exploring a derelict ship. They had stumbled into a trap set by those who had learned to survive at all costs, no matter the consequences. The walls of the abandoned ship seemed to close in on them as they realized the horrifying truth. The greatest threat to their survival wasn't the Class 15 death world, but the humans who had made it home. As the crew of the Sirius Dawn delved deeper into the mysteries of the abandoned ship, their understanding of the terrifying reality that had unfolded on the Class 15 death world grew more disturbing by the hour. The logs they uncovered painted a picture of a humanity that had been pushed to the brink of extinction, but had fought back with an intensity and ingenuity unlike anything they had ever imagined. These humans hadn't just struggled to survive the hostile environment. They had become the planet's most terrifying force. The Class 15 death world, a place so unforgiving that it had wiped out entire species, had once been their prison. But through sheer will and relentless adaptation, they had transformed their bodies, their technology, and even their very way of life to survive. The Sirius Dawn crew read on, learning how the humans on the planet had mastered techniques that defied everything the crew knew about biology and physics. They had genetically altered themselves to withstand the planet's harsh radiation, had developed resistance to the extreme temperatures that could kill a normal human in minutes, and had even become immune to the toxic air and deadly wildlife. But it wasn't just survival they had achieved, it was an evolution. The survivors' biology had changed beyond recognition, each generation growing stronger, more resilient, more adapted to the hostile world. The technology found on the ship was a testament to their accomplishments. Nanotech that could repair damaged cells, bioengineering that made them immune to toxins, and machines that could interface directly with their bodies, enhancing their senses and physical abilities. They had unlocked secrets that no other species had even dreamed of. It was this very technology that had allowed them to create the ship, the last hope for the survivors. Yet, as the crew pieced together the ship's logs, it became clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The escape vessel had not been designed simply to transport them away from danger. It had been built to preserve humanity's legacy, to carry these altered humans across the stars to a place where they could continue their existence. But the genetic modifications, while necessary for survival, had come at a high price. The survivors had become something different, something that no longer resembled the humans who had first stepped onto the planet. Genetic engineering and cybernetic enhancements had become so ingrained in their way of life that they were no longer considered extraordinary. They were essential. Every human on that planet had altered themselves, whether through mechanical implants or biological modifications. Strength, speed, resilience, these were the traits that were valued, and anything less was considered weak. The ship's logs detailed how the altered humans had become almost unrecognizable, no longer bound by the limitations of their original biology. They had evolved into beings whose very cells were designed to survive, no matter the cost. It was this transformation that had allowed them to thrive in such a hostile environment. But it also meant that the survivors were no longer human in the way the crew of the Sirius Dawn understood. They had transcended humanity, becoming something more, yet also something less. As the crew continued to explore the ship's dark corridors, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were now standing on the edge of a chilling new reality. The humans who had once built the ship were no longer part of the same species they had once been. Their minds, altered by years of isolation and forced evolution, had become as dangerous as their bodies. It wasn't just their physical transformations that were horrifying. It was the cost of these changes. The survivors had lost their humanity, their connection to the past. They had become creatures born from necessity, built to survive at any cost. And now, the Sirius Dawn crew was faced with the grim truth. The humans who had built this ship had not only conquered the planet, they had become the planet. They had become the ultimate predators, adapted in every way to a world that should have killed them. The crew was left with a terrifying thought. If the humans aboard the ship were no longer truly human, what did that mean for the future of the species? The altered humans had evolved beyond the need for conventional society or morality. They had become beings of pure survival, driven by instincts and instincts alone. The Sirius Dawn crew was trapped between two choices: understand these new beings and perhaps find a way to live alongside them, or fight to escape a nightmare created by the very species they were trying to explore. They could not escape the truth. Humanity's greatest strength had also become its greatest curse. The legacy of their adaptation had given birth to something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The crew of the Sirius Dawn had begun to grasp the terrifying reality of their discovery. The mutated humans aboard the derelict ship were not just grotesque monsters. They were a new breed of survivor, having evolved far beyond the limitations of ordinary humanity. As the crew explored the ship further, it became evident that the mutations were still progressing, and the survivors, though trapped in stasis for generations, were far from extinct. In fact, the changes to their biology and consciousness had only enhanced their resilience and adaptability. They were no longer simply human. They had become something far more dangerous. Their physical forms were more powerful, their minds sharper and more focused. The crew soon realized that these altered humans were not victims of their environment. They had become the masters of it, able to endure the harshest conditions and adapt in ways unimaginable to the rest of the galaxy. As the crew ventured deeper into the ship, they encountered the survivors awakening from their long stasis. These beings, once human but now far beyond that, moved with terrifying precision. Their bodies glowed faintly with an eerie, almost otherworldly energy. The crew was caught off guard by the sheer power emanating from these beings. It wasn't just their physical strength that was unnerving. It was their intelligence, their ability to read the crew's thoughts before they even spoke, as if they had unlocked some hidden level of perception. As the crew continued to watch, in awe and fear, one of the mutated humans stepped forward. It was a tall, imposing figure, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was a leader, no doubt, and it spoke with a voice that seemed to reverberate through the ship's very walls. The leader revealed himself to be the former commander of the Class 15 expedition, the one who had led the first wave of humans to this hellish planet. But now, after decades of isolation and forced evolution, he had become something altogether different. His body had been integrated with the ship's AI, an advanced system designed to ensure the survival of the human race, and the results were staggering. The commander had transcended human limitations. He was no longer bound by the weaknesses of flesh and bone. His mind had expanded beyond anything the crew could comprehend. He had become the ultimate symbol of human endurance, embodying the terrifying potential of humanity's will to survive. The commander spoke of a future where humans could achieve even greater heights, where the altered humans could guide the rest of humanity toward an era of unparalleled strength and innovation. His vision was one of evolution, where the human race would abandon its frailties and embrace the power of adaptation. But as he spoke, the crew of the Sirius Dawn felt a growing unease. The leader's vision was not without its dangers. These mutated humans had already shown their willingness to push the boundaries of what was morally acceptable in the name of survival. Would they now seek to impose their will on the galaxy, transforming other species into tools for their own survival, or even forcefully evolve humanity into something unrecognizable? The crew was faced with an agonizing choice. On one hand, they could try to communicate with these beings, trying to understand their knowledge and potentially gain access to their extraordinary scientific advancements. The altered humans held secrets to biology, nanotechnology, and survival strategies that could revolutionize the galaxy. If they could negotiate a peaceful alliance, humanity could thrive in ways never before imagined. But on the other hand, the Sirius Dawn crew could see the danger. These humans, who had become so far removed from their original form, might not see others as equals. Their vision of survival could easily turn into domination. The leader spoke of a future where the altered humans would guide humanity's evolution, But how far would they go to ensure that future? Would they forcefully adapt others to their will, turning the galaxy into an empire of the altered? Time was running out. The crew could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on them. The ship hummed with energy, as if the mutated humans were waiting for their response. With the leader's eyes fixed on them, the crew could sense the power and intelligence behind those glowing orbs. They had to act quickly. Every instinct told them to escape, to leave this nightmare behind. But they knew that they might never encounter such an opportunity again. The knowledge and power these beings possessed could change the course of humanity's future, but the risk of unleashing a force too dangerous to control weighed heavily on their minds. Should they trust these altered humans, or was this the beginning of a new, terrifying chapter in human history? One where survival came at the expense of everything that made humanity truly human? The final confrontation aboard the derelict ship was like nothing the crew of the Sirius Dawn had ever anticipated. The leader of the mutated survivors, now an embodiment of human evolution, stood before them, his glowing eyes filled with the raw power of generations of genetic adaptation. His voice echoed through the cold metal corridors as he spoke of a future where humanity would be forged anew, stronger, more resilient, and ready to dominate the galaxy. Yet, despite the awe-inspiring power of these altered humans, the crew felt something stirring within them, something that had been with humanity from the very beginning. It wasn't power or intelligence or even raw strength, but the core of what made humanity unique. The ability to adapt not just physically, but emotionally and morally. The Sirius Dawn crew knew that the time had come to remind these altered humans what they had long forgotten, the heart of humanity. In a tense standoff, the crew of the Sirius Dawn chose not to meet the leader's challenge with force or threats, but with words and ideas. They spoke of the human spirit, of the power of cooperation, of the unbreakable will to fight for others even in the face of impossible odds. They reminded the mutated humans that, despite all their enhancements, it was the ability to care for each other, to work together in harmony, that had been humanity's greatest strength. The crew shared stories of Earth's past, of struggles, wars, but also moments of compassion, unity, and hope. They spoke of how humans had survived plagues, famine, and natural disasters, not just by adapting to their environments, but by staying human in the process. They had never lost the essence of what it meant to be human: empathy, love, and the drive to make the world better for the generations to come. The leader of the mutated humans listened intently, his glowing eyes flickering with uncertainty. His people, who had long been pushed to the limits of what was biologically possible, had come to see the human race as weak, nothing more than a relic of an era long past. But as the Sirius Dawn crew spoke, something within him began to shift. Perhaps for the first time, he saw something in the humans before him that he had not anticipated, a strength that was not born of their biology, but their ability to hold on to their ideals. The battle they faced now wasn't one of science or strength. It was a battle of willpower and conviction. It was the essence of what made humanity truly unique, something the altered humans had forgotten in their relentless pursuit of survival at any cost. The confrontation reached its zenith. When the commander, his body humming with energy, finally spoke, he acknowledged the wisdom of the crew's words, and with a heavy sigh, he realized the truth of what they had said. Survival alone was not enough. The altered humans had lived through the horrors of the Class 15 death world, but they had lost something crucial along the way: the very soul of humanity. They had become beings of pure endurance, but at the cost of what made them human in the first place. It was then that the commander, for the first time, truly saw the value of the human spirit, the unquantifiable strength of cooperation, compassion, and hope. In a stunning moment of unity, the mutated humans, led by their commander, chose not to destroy or dominate the humans from the Sirius Dawn, but to coexist. The knowledge and power of the evolved survivors were offered, not as a weapon, but as a bridge to a future where the best of both the old and new humanity could combine. The two groups, though vastly different in form and ability, found a way to communicate, to learn from one another, and to build a future together. What had once been a ship of death, a symbol of humanity's greatest fears and the perils of unchecked survival, was now transformed into a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the unyielding desire to never lose sight of what made humanity truly great. As the Sirius Dawn prepared to leave the derelict ship behind, it carried with it more than just data. It carried a legacy. A legacy of survival, yes, but also of redemption. The knowledge of the altered humans' scientific breakthroughs, their biology, and their resilience would change the course of human history. But more importantly, the Sirius Dawn returned to Earth with the realization that humanity's greatest triumph was not in becoming the strongest, but in holding on to the values that made them human in the first place. It was a victory of the heart, the soul, and the mind. Humanity had learned the ultimate lesson. No matter the trials, no matter the obstacles, they would always find a way to survive, not just by adapting to the world, but by staying true to themselves.